Alright, today I will be talking about the Kiev and Ruse. The Kiev and Ruse was an ancient civilization made up of Slavic tribes in what is now Western Russia, and even a little bit of Poland, and Hungary and such. This is Oleg of Novgorod. He was a Norseman who founded the Kiev and Rus. He moved from Scandinavia, like Sweden, Norway, Finland, to Novgorod to establish his kingdom, which was more like a federation of Slavic tribes. And so he basically solidified Norse and Kiev and Rus connections because he was a Norseman and established a Norse regency in the Kiev and Rus. Alright, this is Scandinavia because, of course, as I mentioned before, Scandinavia and Novgorod and the Rus had very good connections because of Oleg. These are the Viking guards. This is a little interesting. So Oleg, because he was a Norseman, had ties with his clan in Scandinavia. So he had access to hundreds of, maybe even thousands of troops to establish a little military for the Kiev and Rus. So he called on these men, mercenaries, because he didn't have enough time or resources to establish a citizen army. Because, as I mentioned before, it was a federation, so most of the Slavic tribes would be unwilling, and the larger city-states would certainly, even maybe put up a rebellion against the Rus if they requested military service for every citizen. So they protected Novgorod and the Rus, not Russians. This is Kiev because eventually, over time, Novgorod was displaced as the capital for the Kiev and Rus, and it was moved to its namesake, Kiev. It during this time is like when it became most powerful, the Kiev and Rus. And a little fun fact: there was this regent of Kiev, named Olga. Olga of Kiev. So she was a little insane, because she was mad at these Slavic people, the Drevlians. So yeah, sorry about that, but shoot, sorry. She was mad at the Drevlians for murdering her husband, Igor of Kiev, when he went to collect taxes and tribute from the Drevlians. So the Drevlians actually wanted her to marry their prince, and so they sent a delegation of 20 men who she, as a nice reception to them, buried in the ground. They were all literally 6 feet under by the end of their arrival. So, I mean, you should really call it a departure because they all died, of course. But then she sent a letter to the prince saying that she would marry him. She just needed some help, getting over there. So he again sent 10 people, his best men, bureaucratic heroes, really, to escort her. It was a long journey from Drevlia, or whatever you call it, to Kiev. So she invited them into a bathhouse. Sorry. To relax a little bit and clean themselves. So she locked them in there after they entered and burned it to the ground. Little insane, because as I mentioned before, she was insane. But the craziest thing she's done was she went to the Strevlian city, the one responsible for the murder of Igor of Kiev, her husband. She was pretty fond of him, of course. Yeah. So she went there and requested 3 birds per household. they had already heard of her murderous rampages before, so they complied. They each gave her 3 or 6, I think, birds or sparrows or pigeons or whatever, to her. She promptly tied sulfur, kindling, and ember to the birds and let them go. The birds usually settled in the nests on the Drevlian houses, right? So they returned to their nests and lit the entire city ablaze. An entire city was burned down by birds. A little fun tidbit. Alright, this is a map of all the Slavic cultures in the world. You see Ukraine, you know, big one, and that's where the Kiev and Ruse is located. In this general area, so you can see that it held a lot of Slavic territory and the Baltic territory, so it, had most Slavic groups in the ancient world in it. So that's pretty interesting. These are all the principalities and etc. You can see it expands into Finland, etc. Almost goes all the way to Volga, Bulgaria. In fact, trade routes there. That's really messy, but it says the Byzantine Empire because they had fantastic connections to the Kiev and Rus because of the hide trade, and to get better deals with the Byzantine Empire for gold and other luxuries, they converted to Christianity, Catholicism, Orthodoxy, etc. So that was a big deal because it turned Russia 4 centuries to current day into a Russian state, excluding the Soviet period where religion was banned. This is Kiev again, I think. So yeah, it's just like modern day Kiev from, this has been, cultural center for millennia. This represents the hide trade because the hide trade was actually one of the most prominent trades in the ancient Kiev and Rus. That's what, they had to offer to the Byzantines. So there were major trade routes going through the Slavic world to the Balkan world to the Byzantine world. Why this is so important is it connected, the north and south of Europe. It connected, Russia, the northernmost country, nation, principalities and etc., chiefdoms, Slavic tribes, to the Mediterranean world. It opened a whole new market for both the Russians and the Mediterraneans to, resell things and stuff. This is Poland and Lithuania and all the Baltic nations. They formed a commonwealth in the mid 1500s called the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Pretty self-explanatory, and they rivaled the Kiev and Rus. I mean, originally Poland was the one who did all the fighting, and they were the one. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth came after this, right? So but Poland was very powerful in the 1400s, 1300s, 1200s mainly, but it actually fended off the Mongol army, right? So, of course, they were a threat to the Kievan Rus. But more so of a threat was the Mongols. As you can see in this also pixelated map, the Mongols expanded all the way to Volga, Bulgaria, and, Novgorod's all the way over here. Kiev's here. But you can see their expanse. Major this actually doesn't show the true expanse of the Golden Horde, which is the ones who pushed the Kievan Rus out of the Kievan Rus. This is just Genghis Khan's conquest, I believe. So you can see how he influenced the Black Sea and the Kievan Rus. And, it's a massive sphere of influence for them. So, of course, it would influence the Kievan Rus in some way. And that way was the Kievan Rus broke up. It became broken because of these two great powers, one on the east, one on the west. It was a fantastic rivalry with the Kiev and Rus being the meat of the sandwich, the bounty, the cornucopia, really, like in the Hunger Games. That's what they would strive for. that massive amount of territory that was very valuable. And then a few centuries later, Moscow came around. Of course, it was a principality before during the Kiev and Ruse's reign, but it became a successful and vibrant city more so in the 1500s after the Kiev and Rus disbanded and Muscovy formed. The man responsible for this was Ivan the Terrible. He was not so terrible for the Russians because he expanded Muscovy into even greater depths than the Kiev and Rus did. He reached the Khanate of Siberia, which is now Siberia, or a little bit of Siberia actually, and he pushed up against the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, who had taken a good chunk of the territory after the Mongols receded. So, he actually forced the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth into, not him personally, but his empire, or, Tsarship or whatever, forced them into, disband, like, non-existence. He and his empire is responsible for the fall of Poland. And so, this is a map of his territory, Russia. It's the first time that name came into being. It's really Muscovy, though. You can see the massive amount of territory compared to this amount of territory-ish. So, yeah. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned and enjoyed.